This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 517, the event platform levels up. On today's show, we're talking about Drupal's event platform, what's new and what's to come with our guest, Martin Anderson-Clutz. We'll also cover ECA Tamper as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is the one and only Martin. As a principal solutions engineer at Acquia, Martin aspires to be a Drupal evangelist, demonstrating the power and flexibility of open source. Martin was the world's first triple certified expert and lives in London, Ontario, Canada, though he can usually be found at a variety of Drupal camps and conferences as well. I don't know why it is, but every time I read triple, it makes me think of like a triple bypass or something. I
Well,
think the
it's funny because
certification for that.
I live in Canada where everybody drinks Tim Hortons coffee, and like the famous Canadian coffee order at Tim Hortons is a double double. So it always kind of
Uh,
reminds me of that. So
uh,
Yeah.
triple could also be a coffee that it has way too much milk and sugar in it.
Yeah,
Sounds
triple would be
sounds
too much.
gross.
All right. I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are joining us for, I was going to say the next 4 weeks, but I know there's a gap in there. So for the next group of guest hosts is going to be James Sansbury, CEO at Tugboat. James is a musician turned web architect with nearly 2 decades of experience building large scale digital platforms. He has led projects for major brands, including Intel, Cisco, the Recording Academy, Martha Stewart, Sci-Fi, Bravo, and MSNBC. Now, as CEO at Tugboat, he helps teams ship high-quality code quickly and confidently. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks, everybody.
So, I know you're at Tugboat, formerly Lullaby. How many
Yeah.
how many musicians turned web architects are there were there at
It's a
Lullaby?
prerequisite when you get hired.
Yeah, for folks that don't know, the original founder, one of the founders of Lullabot was Jeff Robbins, who had a rock band in the 90s called Orbit. And yeah, so I think that may have contributed to why I got hired actually when he found out had some music background. So
All right, and chiming in is also John Picozzi, our usual host, solution architect at EPAM.
Hey, everybody. I wanted to take a second, and I know Martin, James, and I are all fresh back from Drupal GovCon, and
mhm.
it was just a wonderful conference down in College Park, Maryland, and some great sessions. A lot of AI, but I there was some great stuff, and like you really great explainers on AI, great use cases for AI. I saw this great. I'm gonna use great a lot, which is unfortunate, but where I'm at right now.
Is AI generated content now.
Yeah, I know.
Put some M dashes in there.
It was this demo of a chatbot using AWS Bedrock, which I was not overly familiar with, and I was like, "This is very cool." And the person giving the demo even put in like some of the client files into a knowledge base, and then used that to inform the chatbot and have the chatbot work off of those files to provide responses. It was very cool. Too cool to talk about in its entirety in this segment. So I wrote a blog post, recapped it. Martin and I also co-presented. There's some great Easter eggs in our presentation. Feel free to check
Oh,
those out. I'm not going to go into detail.
yeah.
Read the blog post, you'll find out more. But I'm wondering, James or Martin, if you had any additional insight into GovCon or things you'd like to share.
Well, one thing I'll mention quickly is that I'm pretty sure all the sessions are actually already up on Drupal TV. So if folks
Yeah.
want to catch any of those sessions, including ours, that's a good place to go and check them out.
That
Yep.
that is, and way to stay in brand, Martin, because I would have just said YouTube. But yeah, Drupal TV, go there first. You had something to add?
Yeah, that was pretty incredible how quickly they got the recordings up. I I was expecting like most conferences I go to, it's like a couple months later and you're still waiting for your recording to go up. So,
Yeah. Bob McDonald was, like, on it. He was in every
nice.
room checking to make sure you hit the big
Yeah.
red button. He was like and then I asked him, like, at the day 2 after party before I, like, left to get on my flight. I was like, "Hey, Bob, when are the videos gonna be available?
Yeah.
I kinda wanna put them in my blog post." He goes, "Oh, day 1's already up and day 2 will be up,
Yeah.
like,
It's
I don't know,
incredible.
tonight." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool. Thank you."
Yeah. Yeah, I've been to some larger conferences, places that, bigger than any of the camps and DrupalCons and stuff like that, and many of them just don't even have any recording at all. And so it's always incredible going to a Drupal event and seeing how nicely the setup is for recording. You just get, a big red button to push and you're off to the races. And I think
And
Kevin Thole did a lot of that work, and
Yeah, he
as long as
Bernardo
you can
helps out a
remember to
bunch.
do it, that's
Yeah.
the big,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. But
there were a
still, it's
couple
incredible.
people
So,
like 2 minutes in, they're like, "Oh, right. There we go."
yeah.
One one bummer though is I don't know that they recorded the keynotes, which I was looking for, and I
Oh,
was kinda
yeah.
like, "Oh, come on, those were 2 really great keynotes.
Mhm.
I wish they were recorded," but
Yeah.
hey, you know what? It's a little glass in the chimney for people to go start going to these events as opposed to trying to catch
wait,
all the videos at home.
glass in the chimney?
Yeah, yeah,
Glad I'm
What
yeah.
not the
is
only one.
that?
Yeah, okay, so this is this is something I heard that, like, people that work chimney sweeps and people that repair chimneys, right, would, maybe back in the day, ta put a piece of glass in the chimney until they got payment for the work that had been done,
Oh.
and then they'd drop a rock down, and it'd break the glass, and, like, people could use their chimney, but, like, it was like a I don't know, like an insurance policy
Huh.
for those workers to make sure that they were getting paid for their work.
Hmm,
Alright.
not
You
sure how
can
that
you can
applies
you
here,
can
but
per you
okay,
can peruse the internet to
I
see
will
if
look it
that's
up.
actually factual or if I maybe just made that up or got misinformed, but
Mhm.
it applies here because, a lot of people don't go to conferences because 'cause they're like, "Oh, I can just go to, I can just watch it on YouTube," right? So, like, the lack of keynote recording means that you should go to the conference.
Yeah.
Before we talk about Event Platform, let's turn it over to Martin, who maintains a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own, to talk about our module of the week. What do you have for us this week, Martin?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted a flexible way to manipulate the data being used in your ECA models? There's a module for that. It's called ECA Tamper, and it was created in April of 2022 by Jurgen Haas of Lake Drops. And it has 1.0.6 and 2.0.4 versions available, the latter of which supports Drupal 10.4 and 11. It is actively maintained and has security coverage and has 6 open issues, none of which are bugs, which is quite good considering it's officially in use by 1,087 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, for anyone who hasn't used it before, Tamper is a generic plugin system for transforming data. It's often used with migrations and feeds where you need to make sure incoming data matches the data type of the field where it will be stored. We actually covered Feeds Tamper as module of the week all the way back in episode 56 of this podcast. Now, for ECA, you can use Tamper plugins with conditions, so a model can compare against a modified result. Or you can use the Tamper plugins with actions, storing the result as a token that can be used for subsequent actions. I ended up using ECA Tamper in the event platform for a model that sends out emails if an accepted session hasn't yet been confirmed by the author, and the session confirmation is a specific number of days out, for example, 3 days away or 1 day away. So let's talk about ECA Tamper.
It's funny you mentioned it, but I went right back to Feeds Tamper when you started talking. I was like, "Ah, yeah, that's cool." I didn't realize two things here. One, I didn't realize that like Tamper was kind of a like an API or a standard way of building these sorts of things, which is cool. Not to get all meta here, but could you build an ECA flow that then tampered your content?
I don't see why you couldn't, particularly because you can use ECA to, for example, alter a node as you save it. And I think there are actually examples of that in the event platform as well. So yeah, you could definitely build those kinds of manipulations into that kind of a ECA workflow.
There is also a sandbox content tamper module too, so that probably would work with ECA, I would imagine, at some point. So, one question I have is actually because I'm thinking back to Feeds Tamper as well, which I mean, it's kind of an obvious analog, but I remember that interface being extraordinarily complex. I mean, it was solving a complex problem. It wasn't unnecessarily complex, but it was complex. And ECA is already a complex interface. How what's the UX like when you're adding tampers? Is it pretty straightforward? Are you kind of diving through tons of fields and configuration to try to get what you want done?
If I recall correctly, the way that I implemented was actually by adding an action that would sort of, in this case, look at the current date or sorry, look at the offset that I had set. So, it was like plus 3 days as an example, and then
Okay.
basically put that into a token, use that for the comparison. So it wasn't especially complex. It was just sort of your
Okay.
standard ECA interface. And yeah, it was made it fairly easy to use that way.
Awesome. All right. So thank you, Martin. As always, you're finding ways to get on topic modules of the week, even if it's just something you use in a particular project. So if folks wanted to suggest a module leak, what's the best way for them to do that?
We're always happy to have conversations about interesting modules or candidates for module of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as Man Clue on all of the Drupal and social platforms.
All right, let's start with it's been a little while since we had you on to talk about Event Platform. In fact, why don't we have a when were you on to talk about it?
Oh, I think, well, it's funny because this came up when Kaleem was on recently because he was
Oh,
on the show
365.
with me.
Yeah,
That's right,
it was the yeah,
365. So
that's right. Okay, so it's been a little while since we've been on to talk about this specifically. Can you remind our listeners what Event Platform is before we dive in?
absolutely. So the event platform grew out of an initiative by Drupal's event organizers working group to provide a modern platform to accelerate the creation of websites for Drupal camps. It started as a fork of the Florida Drupal Camp website and provides a system to manage user submitted sessions, including an ability to automatically email session proposal authors as their sessions are accepted, declined, or waitlisted. Now, in addition to a robust content architecture, Event Platform also includes some bespoke tooling, for example, to bulk generate time slots, which are managed as taxonomy terms in Event Platform, and a drag and drop interface to schedule accepted sessions.
Okay.
Interesting. So, I mean, I'm going to give you a kind of a general question here, Martin, because I know probably in the last like what 175, 200 episodes, a lot has been updated or has changed with the event platform. But kind of what are the newest, I guess, or the biggest, latest features of the event platform?
Yeah, I guess I'll focus really on some of the things that have been in development this year. So, one of the things that's new is a system that's built directly into your Drupal site to score sessions. So, I had worked with some different camps and I could see some were using like Google Sheets or different kinds of tools, and then having to sort of like from there take the scores, go back into Drupal, and then accept or decline sessions and those kinds of things. So I thought having a way to score those directly within Drupal would sort of save some time. It even now by default will hide the author of the session in sort of a lot of the listing interfaces for camps that prefer to sort of not keep the session author as part of the consideration on which sessions they want to accept.
Hmm.
And then once the sessions are all scored, it has an interface where you can sort and sort the sessions based on the average score and then use that to sort of bulk, you know, accept, waitlist, or decline your sessions. So, sort of tying that all together.
Now, can you set your kind of like evaluation criteria?
Yes, so it's actually implemented using web form as sort of a single Likert element, which means that to go in and update the criteria, it's super quick and easy. You don't even have to sort of add multiple questions. You can just sort of add or remove or change the listings that are provided as part of that Likert scale.
So so I know this is an upcoming question, so I'm not I don't want to talk about recipes directly at the moment, but event platform came out before recipes really were a huge thing. But I think if I understand correctly, it's not truly like it's not a distribution or something like that, right? So what is the upgrade path for event platform? Because for example, Nedcamp is using event platform at least partially now. If we want to use some of these new features, is it as easy as updating and the way you normally would for a module, or are there other things that are in my future to take advantage of those features?
That's a great question. So I would say that the event platform was built following the model of, as you say, something that was kind of more of a precursor to recipes, something that I used to call configuration kits, which were similar in the sense that they were really sort of modules that were more or less a set of configuration that would help you to build out your content architecture. Over the course of working on it for whatever it's been now, 3.5 years, I want to say, there have been some functional components, and so that's a bit of a complicating factor in terms of what we're going to talk about later in terms of the potential move to a set of recipes. But it does also have the consequence that the event platform, at least in terms of how you would use it with your site, is intended to be more of a starting point. And in that sense, in terms of having an upgrade path today, that doesn't really exists so much. There has been an issue raised about potentially providing some kind of an upgrade path. I could see there being a way to add hooks that would sort of, add some of the fields and relationships that are the differentiators between the major versions. So the possibility is there, but I at this point couldn't commit to, when or if that would be available.
So I see in the list here, multi-event architecture is one of the newer features. What does that look like? Mean?
Right. So the original version of Event Platform really assumed that you were creating a site that would be for a single event. So, as an example, NedCamp 2025. The If you actually look at the Florida Drupal Camp repo today, they actually have in their instructions to say when you want to use it for the next year, here's how to reset the site so that you can sort of, more or less start over. And I think what they do is they will use something like Tome or a similar solution to basically render out a static version so that you can still have the previous year's content, but not in the database or any of those kinds of things. So the principle of a multi-event architecture is really to sort of add a way of having different events. So, in the case of something like NedCamp, each year's event as an entity in the database, and then using entity relationships to sort of say, I'm going to submit a session, but under the hood or sort of behind the scenes, that's actually specifically for a particular event. And so it adds a lot of complexity under the hood, but it also means from an ongoing management standpoint, really lowers the level of technical know-how that some of these camps need in terms of the organizers and being able to manage their website on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think as early adopters, we actually added our own taxonomy for camp year and kind of plugged it in where we needed to. But
I think I think
yeah,
Drupal Camp New Jersey did the same thing as well. So you guys are in good company.
yes, perfect. Wondering on the multi-event architecture, it does it does it allow itself if you didn't want to do by year, but you wanted to do literally different events? Could you use it in the same sort of way?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the models that I looked at in terms of how that whole architecture should look is actually events.drupal.org because they do exactly what you're talking about. So, the last couple of years we've had three different DrupalCons every year. And so, this year we've had DrupalCon Atlanta, DrupalCon Vienna, and DrupalCon Nara is coming up as well. And so trying to sort of look at the patterns in terms of how does that kind of an architecture impact things like navigation and what's the role of the homepage in that kind of an architecture, really trying to sort of be informed by best practices by sites that have been doing this for a while.
And there are plenty of other features that have been added to the event platform. I mean, you're doing a great job maintaining it and improving it, month over month it seems. But I understand it now ships with its own theme. Is that right?
That is correct. So that is something that people had been asking about for a while. It had really been sort of, I would say, deliberately outside the scope of what I originally built into the event platform. But eventually it became clear and shout out to Bernardo Martinez as somebody who has been involved with supporting a variety of different camps, in particular the Florida Drupal camp, but then also as other camps have tried to sort of adapt that sort of Florida Drupal camp site and model to their own camps has been supporting a lot of them as well. And so he and I started talking about, what would it look like to basically fork the custom theme that was built for the Florida Drupal camp. And then, as I had done with the event platform, kind of my goal was to say, for those camps that really don't have any sort of technical expertise in terms of creating a custom theme or even doing any kind of patching of a provided contrib theme, making elements of it configurable so that if you want to change like the little palm tree that you see on the Florida Drupal camp, that's something that you can upload through the theme settings. You can update the colors and some of those kinds of things. So that might be extended in the future, but really the goal initially at least was to give camps the ability to sort of give their sites a professional look and feel with a bit of local flavor, again, without having to write any custom code.
So,
So
am I correct? Did I miss it? It's not in event platform yet. It will be released.
So it's actually a project of its own because it is a theme. So
Ah,
we decided, so Bernardo and I and a couple of other folks sat down at DrupalCon Atlanta, which is really where we started to get working on this in earnest. And actually, somebody at our table suggested using AI to come up with a name for it,
mm.
and the best one by far was Event Horizon. And so that is the name of the theme
Nice.
that's intended as a companion for Event Platform.
well,
That's
and
that's a good
and that's
name.
what I was gonna ask. Is that a reference to the movie, to black holes, to both?
I mean, I think it works as a bit of a combination of things. Obviously it being explicitly event related is helpful, but the fact that it is both kind of a astrophysical reference as well as to sort of a, fun cult movie.
Mhm.
There's lots of sort of, layers of interesting meaning there. The other thing that actually is interesting is since we created the Event Horizon, actually, I think within about the first week, somebody from the community posted an issue on there asking if there could be a way to use it without the event platform because they liked the way
Mm,
the sort of, header and menus worked in the footer.
Mm.
And so I think there is a possibility down the road that maybe I'll make a separate theme, like a base theme that could be just called Horizon. And then
mhm.
Event Horizon could be the event platform specific version that would sit on top of that.
Mm.
But I can't I can't say again how soon or if I'll, have sort of the time and energy to get to that. But if anybody listening to this podcast is interested in helping with that work, absolutely I could see that being a benefit to the
as,
community for sure.
I
as Nick
well,
as Nick knows, as the maintainer of the NedCamp website, he knows how much of a black hole sometimes event websites can be. So I mean, I feel like that's perfect.
Fits.
well, I kinda wanna sidebar here for a second, actually, Martin, because you always say this in the intro every week with you for Modular Week that you're a maintainer of a number of modules and recipes, and y you have a lot of project like this that you work on. Smart Date's another big one. I know storage is another, although I don't think storage takes too much of your time anymore, but how how do you plan out your contribution time? How do you consider that? Is it I know I imagine some of it is related to Acquia, like just sponsored time, but I don't imagine the sponsoring all the time that you're working on these kinds of things. How do you how do you kind of plan out your time and contribution level? And is it just kind of ad hoc
Don't
or is it
don't worry,
a
Martin.
plan?
Nobody from Acquia leadership listens to this podcast.
Can verify. I will say that actually speaking at camps helps to drive the actual contribution to the projects that
Mm,
I'm speaking about. So, as an example, I submitted and had accepted a session for mid-camp, specifically about event platform. It was kind of the first time I was going to speak about it as sort of its own dedicated session topic. And so, leading up to that session, there were a few things that I was hoping I could get fixed in time to
Yeah.
be able to talk about them at mid camp. And so that definitely drove, it basically gave me a deadline to work towards. And then I've since talked about it at Asheville and I'm going to be talking about it in Vienna. So there is sort of,
Okay.
it acts as sort of a, a waypoint in terms of, a date to work towards. And then on top of that, I have certain ideas around things that I think our priorities, and then we have, meetings that we'll probably talk about in a bit in terms of, collaborating with the community, understanding what other people's priorities are, and trying to sort of weave that in, figure out how that can align to some of those milestones. One other thing, John, you had asked about some of the 2025 features, or at least recent features. One other thing that we actually haven't talked about yet is in the context of that multi event architecture. I did also come to the realization that there was the potential to build in some workflow features for the events themselves. So, as somebody who goes to a lot of different Drupal camps, I've definitely observed that there are kind of patterns in terms of how the events themselves tend to be organized. So, early on, there's kind of a save the date announcement that goes out. Then at some point, they will open a call for sessions where, people can go in and actually create those session proposals. At some point, that will be closed off, and then they go through a process of evaluating the sessions, eventually publishing a schedule, and then at a certain point, the actual camp itself will begin. And then, after the end of the last date, it goes into kind of a, like look at the YouTube playlist or, thanks everyone for their participation. And so what I realized is that based on some of those key dates, a number of which we were already capturing in the event platform, we had the potential to actually have a workflow that could automate prioritizing the most relevant pieces of information throughout that life cycle of, a camp or similar event. So I think in the end, I only had to add maybe 2 or 3 dates to be able to capture, that full range. So things like the session submission deadline, I don't think was part of the original list, but is now, and was able to use, both the built-in Drupal workflows as well as I found a module called content moderation, or no, moderation state condition, that allows you to show or hide blocks based on the moderation state of the entity that you're viewing. The only tricky part there was that the project page said that it worked for entities, but once I got working with it, I realized that it actually had been hard coded to work with nodes. But I was able to work with the session authors, got a patch submitted, and eventually accepted and included in a new major release that allows the same capabilities to work with taxonomy terms, which is how the event platform manages those, the multi-year events.
I think that's a good example of something that can also help organizers that are y- y- planning out their event, right? We've been doing NetCamp now for 11 years, and it
Mm,
wasn't until like 2 or 3 years ago. I think Mike came up with this. He built a big spreadsheet that put out like it was always kind of ad hoc. Like each year, we'd be like, okay, we have to select, the keynote. We need to do the session. Like we knew all that stuff, but 3 or 4 years ago, Mike came in and built a spreadsheet and said, okay, in our first or second meeting of the year, he was like, "Okay, we probably wanna have the keynote by this date." We probably like, we planned all those 4 or 5 dates out, and, when you plan ahead, it makes these
Things get a
meetings.
lot easier.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that until you've done it, it's hard to think through that and plan that ahead, but
mhm,
if you have, like, an intake for an event almost, it's like, here are the 5 events you need to build. It gives people a starting place to figure
mm,
out, and maybe there's some help text like, "Hey, you probably want to have your sessions at least 6 weeks before the event is finished. You wanna have 8 weeks for the session select."
mm,
So it gives them, like, "Hey, if you're planning an event, unless it's really small, or you're planning on dedicating 100 hours in the next 2 weeks, it needs to be you need 4 months, 6 months of planning to
hmm.
get this done." So, yeah, I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I know there is also, I can't remember if it's like a wiki that somebody set up that has a lot of kind of event planning wisdom, that maybe there's an opportunity over time to sort of weave some of those into the actual event platform in kind of the automated way. So you put your start date at the top and maybe it could like pre-populate some suggested dates further down
Oh,
based on
yeah.
that. But, definitely lots of, I mean, I agree that particularly for new camp organizers, which, as we speak, I'm kind of in that category myself. It's definitely a huge benefit to be able to draw on some of the experience of people with more experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting more than just a package of modules, but sort of a framework for running an event. That's incredible.
Exactly right.
I want to circle back to something we were chatting about earlier. So we mentioned that this event platform is like a collection of modules and it also has a theme associated with it. And Nick brought up, it sounds like it's not currently recipes under the hood. Would there is there a plan for transitioning certain aspects of it to recipes, and what sort of advantages would there be to that sort of a switch?
Yeah, great question. So, as we talked about earlier, the event platform was developed before there was really this recipe framework. And one of the reasons I was really excited about recipes was that I could see the power of using things like the config actions to be able to more flexibly update an existing site. So as an example, the initial version of Event Platform had a submodule called Event Platform Olivero that would place blocks into,
Mm,
useful regions, but the limitation of doing that in a module, or at least without having to write a lot of very custom logic into like an install hook or something, was that it had to be very specific about which theme it would use. It would have to know what regions existed within that theme and so on. Whereas now in the recipe system, you actually have config actions where you can flexibly place blocks and you can say, if it's this theme, put it into that region. If it's this other theme, put it into
right.
that region. And maybe as a fallback, use something that every theme is probably going to have like content.
Mhm.
So there is definitely some benefit in terms of the flexibility if these could be moved into recipes, but there's a couple of challenges. So number one is that there are there are some elements of kind of functional code. So like PHP, some of the tools that I mentioned in terms of being able to do things like generate time slots or the drag and drop interface. And so we'd have to figure out either just keep those pieces as modules or potentially if there's a way to make them useful as more generic modules
Mhm.
that could be configured to sort of work the way they do currently, then that might be the approach. The other challenge that I ran into is that earlier this year, I decided, rather than focusing on turning what's already in Event Platform into a set of recipes, maybe a good next step would actually be to go a level up and provide more of like a site recipe that could install Event Platform and maybe a few other things
Mhm.
to provide kind of a more robust set of capabilities. And what I discovered as I went to do that was that if I made a recipe that did nothing else except install Event Platform, it would actually time out. It would run for several minutes and time
Uh,
out. Whereas using Drush to install
mhm.
Event Platform usually takes, 15 to 20 seconds. So there was some kind of a very significant difference under the hood.
I
And
know
once I
why.
started, the answer, why, Nick, it's because the module installer in the recipe runner does a lot more sophisticated logic around, what configuration needs to be installed and a few other things. And also because it does them one by one
Mm,
before resetting the container. Whereas particularly in newer versions of Drupal, it will install a variety or a number of different modules, and maybe Nick, the specific number before it actually resets the container. So there's a couple of different reasons why it runs much slower, and effectively,
mm,
Event Platform as it exists today really can't be installed via a recipe. But again, if parts of it could be moved into recipes, it's possible that that would all work together a little more seamlessly. But that's something to explore a little bit more down the road.
hmm.
Yeah, and that's exactly why it is. The module installer in Drupal tries to batch them up to 20 at a time, depending on dependencies and that kind of thing. And it's because there's a memory leak when you rebuild the
Oh.
container each time, and the recipe installer just hasn't there's an issue for it. We can find that issue, but the recipe
Mhm.
installer just hasn't done that. It still goes through them
I feel like we need to
sequentially.
comment on that issue to be like, "Test this with Event Platform.
Yeah.
Good luck."
Here's how to
No,
replicate it.
Drupal CMS, you don't I mean, Drupal CMS is even bigger
Oh,
than
really?
Event Platform
And it
as a
has the same
recipe.
issue?
Yeah,
They have some custom logic to
Mhm.
install it.
Hmm.
yeah, and Event Platform as well, you are meant to install by downloading an archive and then running an installer locally. And maybe that's part of the reason that you can't just sort of install it as a recipe or apply it as a recipe the way you might, given its sort of overall architecture.
Yeah, the thing is that change in module installer sped up install orders of magnitude. It's something like
Hmm.
11.1 to 11.2. You can install pretty much every module in something like 10 seconds, and before it took 2 minutes. And And the problem is with the memory leak, it would take 3 minutes and 2 gigabytes of memory or something, like,
Right.
it was pretty
Wow.
obscene.
So
So, but there's a lot as Martin alluded to, there's a lot of logic around when different types of config gets installed, like when the config entities get installed, when does simple config get installed, when does dependent entities get installed, and there are ways to opt out of this for a particular module, but one of the problems is a lot of people depend on optional config in their config, which you're not supposed to do without certain
Mm.
constraints, but because modules used to install sequentially, the optional config was always there through the installer. And so it has broken some modules that depend on config that's not supposed to really be dependent upon.
so
But
core installer issues aside, right? Like, I mean, there are well, I guess you have to kind of create event platform as a whole platform as opposed to kind of taking out certain features and functionality and turning them into recipes individually, right? Like, because it needs that base platform to make sure that all the other pieces work correctly, right?
Yes and no. So I would say from the time it was originally architected, it was actually split up into kind of a collection of smaller modules. So that, as an example, if you were organizing an event that needed, let's say, sponsors and job listings, but not sessions,
Mhm,
then you could just install the submodules that corresponded to the functionality that you wanted to use, as opposed to just doing sort of the base install that would give you everything. So
mhm.
it has been designed to be kind of modular that way, and so mapping parts of it to recipes, I think, would probably be fairly straightforward. That being said, there are, as I say, some functional pieces, and even more recently, as part of the work I've been doing this year, wrote some install hooks that I would have to see, how cleanly would those map into existing config actions and some of those kinds of things.
Yeah, because in my head right now, I'm like, okay, so we like, kind of early adopted event platform, and it's been great, and it definitely delivers on the promise, even in even that earlier version. But now I'm like listening to some of these features, and I'm like, oh, that could be cool, and that could be cool, and I'm like, but I don't necessarily want to do a clean install and then, have to go to Nick and go, hey, can you migrate all the content over to this new site? Um,
yeah, that's one of the pieces that I'm saddest about is this is probably we're probably on our 4th website. We're all Drupal developers, but each time we rebuild I have copies of all the old databases, but each time we rebuild, we just kind of ditch all the old content
yeah, and
and
the goal with this site was that it was gonna be the last iteration where we would
Mm.
just kinda
should have written better.
upgrade what was there to newer versions. So, I mean, that's why, I'm pushing the recipe question so hard because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, it'd be great to just pull a recipe off for, I don't know, let me go back up here, the, like, multi-event architecture and just be like, boop, oh, okay, it's in there now. Let me retag a couple of things and, like, we're off and running," right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that if you were to update to the last major version, or the last, whatever would you call it, patch release of the 1.0 branch, that
Mhm.
should give you the most recent version of things like the time slot generator and the scheduler.
Yeah.
And then things like for the multi-event architecture, it sounds like if you've already created a taxonomy for that, all you would need to do is really sort of adapt the workflow to work with your taxonomy, which,
Yeah.
like, if you're feeling brave, you could probably manually edit the YAML file for the workflow and
Mhm.
and get that pulled in. At that point, it might even work with the ECA models that are specific to that, around sending notifications and some of those other things. So
Mhm.
you might actually find that if you're willing to sort of do a little spelunking in your YAML files, the provided YAML files, that it's not a crazy amount of work. And would love to get feedback if you decide to take that on. But unfortunately, today there isn't sort of a direct migration path.
I may or may not take that on, I don't know. But I have noticed, and you've mentioned this, though, that there are this is starting to look like a Jacob Ruckowitz project. There's a bunch of little submodules to break it out, which I think is great. like you said, it makes it so you can pick and
That
choose
is a
which
term of
features.
endearment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's you can pick and choose the pieces that you want, and it gives you more flexibility for updating them, right? Because you don't have to worry about updating this monolithic thing. That being said, as you've been working on this over the last few years now, what was the kind of thorniest issue or feature that you had to add or that you worked on in the last, I don't know, 6 months or a year in these updates?
So I would say once I started going down this rabbit hole of the multi-event architecture, one of the things that I realized is that by nature of going into, let's say, views and giving them contextual filters, immediately that means that those page views can't have menu links associated with them anymore. Effectively, as soon as you have
Yeah.
a contextual filter on a views page, it won't even give you the option of providing navigation or a menu link as part of that views configuration. And so I started trying to think about what would be a good alternative in terms of providing navigation. And I talked to some people who had gone down that road before. I think there are some sites that in a similar situation have actually created separate menus for each event, which felt very clunky to me. And what I started thinking about was what if you could provide menu links that had a similar set of logic around trying to tease out some kind of a, for lack of a better word, contextual filter, a contextual piece of information from the current page's URL, and then construct links that would try and sort of be relative to that. So basically provide, or what's the word I'm looking for? Maintain that within the URL structure so that if you were looking at the 2025, let's say, event homepage and you saw a link to the schedule, that it would be a link to that year's schedule. Whereas if you were in the 2024 event section of the website and you saw the same link, it would point to the 2024 session information. Now, I did a little digging. I couldn't find anything that seemed like it would provide that set of capabilities, and so started working on. I think originally I called them dynamic menu links or something like that. And Mike Anello convinced me that I'm so bought into the whole like smart everything that it should be called smart menu links. And so eventually changed it to smart menu links. I did run into some weird things around caching that I just could not quite get fixed. And it was actually while I
Right.
was at Drupal Dev Days, I connected with Wim Leers, asked who he thought would be the best person to talk to. He pointed me to somebody, and I literally caught him as he was leaving for the airport, and he was able to point me in the right direction. And anyway, that it was probably the one of the more complex things that I worked on
Mm.
in a few years. And so I'm definitely glad to sort of not be actively working on that at the moment. But I did also write a blog post. We'll have a link to that in the show notes if people want to get a more sort of detailed history of how that all came to pass.
Just out of curiosity, how many okay, let me say this in a different way. From your work on Event Platform, right? How many other Drupal issues, like Drupal core issues or other Drupal module issues have you, created, been involved in fixing, so on and so forth?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually led to being involved in a lot of very diverse things. So, as an example, we talked before about having the config actions to be able to place blocks in a flexible way. I actually worked on that pretty heavily last year to try and get that into Drupal 11. And that was really, built specifically to have that capability available to Event Platform. And same way, I've worked on issues for Smart Date, moderation state condition, content moderation link, ECA, and even web form, specifically to you know make things way work in the way that Event Platform really needed. And I can't think of too many other core issues beyond the event one, or sorry, the recipes config actions for placing blocks. But there's lots more work to do on the event platform. So I guess we'll see.
There you go. It's interesting to me how, and I think we all have these in our projects, right? Where we're building something and we're like, oh, here's another core issue, and or oh, here's an issue in the module, like, and I got to fix that before I can fix this, and like, it's very just, I mean, it's open source software. It's kind of the way it works. How many camps are using or how many camp websites, I should say, are using Event Platform? Do you have like a leaderboard in your office that every time somebody installs, it's like bling, one more?
Little notch in your belt every time. Yeah.
I mean, I wish I had that kind of visibility, to be honest. We don't really know for sure. There is an issue on the event platform project for people who are using it to sort of add a comment there.
Mm,
But Drupal Dev Days in Vienna, what was that? 2 years ago, I think was really the first one that I know of that used it kind of for their production website. NetCamp, as we've talked about, was also an early adopter. Drupal Dev Days in Burgos last year also used the event platform, as well as New Jersey Drupal Camp, Pacific Northwest Drupal Camp. And even on LinkedIn, somebody posted a really nice write up of using the event platform for Drupal Camp Berlin as well. There have been more recently some different camps that are interested in being on the event platform, and including actually kind of unforking the Florida Drupal Camp website so that moving forward it will actually be on event platform. So
Mm.
lots of
A
interest
lot
in
of good
hopefully movement.
contributors there, right?
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. That being said, I have been recently involved in the organizing of a new Drupal camp in southwestern Ontario, Canada. And
Oh, nice.
so a couple of weeks ago, that actually became the first site to go live officially on the new version of Event
Mm.
Platform,
Are,
the
are you
2.0 version.
are you guys gonna call it Drupal, eh?
Uh,
Drupal A. It's not bad.
I feel like that would be a quality camp name.
that's good. So it sounds like, you've got all these camps using it, but there may be other camps using it too. You need some sort of telemetry. I was thinking, you could come up with something that just similar to like Drupal.org module statistics or whatever, and you could call it a EP phone home. You know,
I like that a lot. Yeah, although it's funny, I think particularly in the open source world, people will sometimes view any kind of telemetry as like some form of evil, like
yeah,
your
yeah,
big brother
I am
somehow. But
strongly on that
yeah.
in that bandwagon because, yeah, you never know what gets once you approve it. It's not even generally like when it's initially added,
Hmm.
but once it's added, you never know what gets sent with it, or if they add to it, or
Right. Yeah, yeah,
um, also
yeah.
opt in versus opt out. But yeah, it would be nice for this type of issue, for this type of project, to know
To know
which
who's using
sites are
it. Yeah.
using it, because it's kind of an ecosystem thing. So seeing what
Hmm.
their use cases are, being able to talk to them would be useful.
Yeah, because even just are folks that are not in the Drupal community using it? Are you aware of camps that are outside of Drupal, that are using the platform at this point?
I definitely know of at least one example of a an event similar to a Drupal camp in the sense that it
Okay.
had sort of community proposed sessions and evaluated those. I think it might have even been one that did sort of multiple per year as opposed to an annual event.
Mm,
But it was great to see that it was useful for something that really had no connection to Drupal sort of directly beyond the developer who was obviously creating the site
Right.
for them. I have also spoken to a couple of folks, most recently, I think at MidCamp, somebody who had been in my presentation there who afterwards mentioned that he works for an agency that does a lot of event websites and thought event platform is definitely something they're going to consider moving to as opposed to some of the proprietary platforms they're using today.
Oh, nice.
yeah.
Speaking of that, I think Event Platform kind of dovetails nicely with Drupal CMS, and not that I think Event Platform should be part of Drupal CMS, but it's a product unto itself, and it's a solution to an issue. Like you said, people that use proprietary event platforms can use the Drupal event platform, and they don't particularly care that it's Drupal under the hood. Maybe at least in the beginning. I'm sure if they start using it, they'll begin to care more about Drupal. But have you thought about possibly trying to get more exposure for event platform kind of as a solution, or are you kind of content right now with it being mostly a Drupal event specific thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I had the benefit early on of working with Kaleem Clarkson, who's a terrific individual and very passionate about event organizing in general. And I think it was really his vision to sort of not make it Drupal specific. And as I say, we've already sort of seen that bear fruit. But at the end of the day, I sort of am cognizant of the fact that, as you mentioned before, there are limits on sort of my time and energy. I love the idea of promoting it more broadly, but, maybe if somebody listening to this podcast wants to come on board and be kind of the hype person who can go out and sort of spread the gospel that way, would love to collaborate and work with somebody whose talents kind of lie in that area.
And then you could call that person the hype homie.
Or the event platform evangelist, maybe.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, yeah, all right, maybe that one's less interstellar, but hey, whatever.
Sure.
Nick just used a buzzword about Drupal CMS, and I'm wondering, are there any thoughts of moving this to Drupal CMS, or does kind of the recipe issue kind of prevent that from being something where, hey, I just installed Drupal CMS and like, oh look, I need an event platform. Let me click the button and have it be the event platform.
So I did consider if there was maybe a path to having event platform, I don't know, distributed. I'm not sure exactly what the right word is, as sort of a add-on on top of Drupal CMS.
Mhm.
I would say my personal opinion is that Drupal CMS is very opinionated to provide a specific kind of site that I don't think necessarily aligns with sort of the base functionality that a Drupal camp needs. And so I sort of have decided that I don't think sort of using Drupal CMS out of the box and then trying to layer event platform on top of that is probably the best approach. But I mentioned earlier that I had started earlier this year on a site recipe. So that's actually called Event Platform Starter. And it was actually implemented as a recipe. But then when I ran into that issue that we talked about in terms of the limitations of the recipe runner from a speed standpoint, effectively today it's very useful as almost like a composer template. So you can sort of spin up a new Drupal site, composer acquire event platform starter. It'll bring in event platform as well as some specific Drupal CMS recipes that are part of the larger ecosystem there. So things like SEO, it'll bring in the Drupal CMS image, so you get some of the image presets or image styles and even responsive image styles. And then it'll provide in the README a series of steps that you can use to sort of quickly build out your event platform site and have a very robust set of features that way. So tried to go with sort of a blended approach there so that people can get some of the capabilities that the community has really worked hard to put into Drupal CMS, but still have a site that I think is more built specifically to the needs of a Drupal camp or similar event.
I'd be interested to see on that reverse, I don't know, I guess flow as well. Because one of the key selling points of Drupal CMS is that they're all recipes. You take or leave the pieces that you want. But I don't think people have been doing that a lot in practice. I think the people using the Drupal CMS recipes are using Drupal CMS. So I'd be curious to see how well they do truly split out. Like, can you include the blog recipe, for example, in event platform and not run into issues, or or not, or the analytics one like we talked about last week?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that in my experience, there were a couple that I was hoping I could pull in. So as an example, the privacy recipe in Drupal CMS,
Oh yeah, good point.
but it does have a dependency on the base recipe that itself will bring in a whole bunch of dependencies, many of which I didn't necessarily think were appropriate for event platforms. So there's I would hope maybe on an ongoing basis, we can continue to sort of refine the interdependencies on
Yeah,
those so that they can be used on a little bit more of a standalone basis. But, obviously there's a whole team managing all those,
yeah.
and that's kind of for them to map out.
That's the thing that kind of makes me nervous about site. We don't have to go down this sidebar too far, but one of the things that makes me a little nervous about site templates, I think I'm really excited for it. I think they might be a good fit for event platform as well. But everything I'm seeing says that it's going to be built on top of Drupal CMS, and it's like, but but Drupal CMS has like 80 module or 90 module dependencies or something. Last time I counted, I don't want to start a project then have to run composer remove on 45 modules that I'm not using. But maybe that will get pulled apart as we get further into site templates.
I
I don't
think
think it's
when
viable.
people just say, Drupal CMS, that means a variety of things to different people, and they may just be thinking about one aspect of it. So, like for example, maybe what folks might be wondering is like, could I download this with Project Browser on an existing site and get it
Good
going?
point.
That sort of a thing. Even though, that's like one very niche component of like what makes up Drupal CMS. That could be, is that a thing that's possible? Martin?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, Project Browser itself is sort of, I feel like very much continuing to evolve.
Mm,
We talked earlier about the potential to move Event Platform to recipes, and as far as I know, the possibility of using Project Browser to find and apply recipes
mhm,
works for Drupal CMS specifically, but partly because it has some elements that are kind of hard coded in there, whereas
mm,
more generally that whole piece is still in development again, last I heard, which so it's entirely possible that smart people have, long since figured that out. But there's sort of a lot of sort of, interwoven issues here in terms of I agree with you, like the idea of saying I could be somebody new to Drupal, maybe
mm,
start with either Drupal CMS or a more vanilla version of Drupal, use that as a visual interface to find the event platform and then get that added to my site is the dream state.
yeah,
But we probably have some more nuanced ways that experience has to happen
mm,
before we can get to that sort of ideal state.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it kinda goes to my next question I was thinking about is like, what is you've probably got a long feature backlog already going for for event platforms. So like, what are some of the things that are on your punch list for new features for event platform?
Yeah, great question. So there's obviously a long list of small things that I would like to get cleaned up, particularly
Mm,
for something like Event Horizon that still technically doesn't have a stable release yet. So, lots of cleanup there. But one of the big things I'd like to tackle at some point is having some kind of an ability to do sort of Drupal native registration for the events. So I think today it's kind of built with the assumption that the camp is probably going to use like an Eventbrite or something like that for the actual sort of, purchasing of tickets. But certainly that could be done using something like Entity Registration and Drupal Commerce. Or there might be, other kinds of integrations, even something like Civi CRM. I know some camps will use as kind of more the commerce backend. So would love to have some more conversations around that. Another piece that actually is in Drupal CMS is the Easy Email Express Mail recipe, and would love to get that sort of woven into event platforms so that when it sends out those emails to session authors to say your session has been accepted and click here to confirm it, or the different kinds of things that those are professionally formatted and look as intuitive as possible. And my hope is that that shouldn't be a crazy long list or a crazy degree of effort, but obviously sometimes the devil's in the details, as they like to say. There is also a module that I discovered as part of some conversations at the community summit DrupalCon last year, which is called Generate Social Media Images. And so the idea is for things like sessions, I think a lot of camps today will have somebody who just sits down with Photoshop and like, grinds through and sort of generates those by hand. But there is the potential to be able to have those automatically created using a template. So there is a module. The limitation right now, as I understand it, is that it doesn't actually sort of save, excuse me, the generated version of the module. And so I think from a performance standpoint, could actually end up putting a lot of load on the website infrastructure. So I'm hoping that that's not a crazy amount of lift. I was talking to another developer recently who said he kind of already has, code that fits that pattern. So, if I can, that's something I would love to get implemented this year. And then, of
mm,
course, as we were talking about with Drupal GovCon, everybody's talking about AI. I haven't completely
mhm,
got my head around how that could add value to a camp website, but I feel like that should be something we're starting to think about. So whether
yeah,
it's doing an initial pass for, spammy content or inappropriate links or some of those kinds of things, there or it could be, as simple as saying, maybe the session author only has to give you the long form description and then you can use AI to generate like the social media
yeah.
version or some of those other, formats that camps often need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that seems like a pretty good use. I was thinking in my head like, "Ugh, no more AI," but, like, getting those summarizing the
Mhm.
description of the talk for social media seems like a really good use. I don't wanna add more to your already overflowing plate, Martin, but all of those features sound great. I'm just wondering, like, is there an upgrade path feature in the future somewhere where, like, maybe if I take the leap and I get onto the latest and greatest version of Event Platform, I can, like, get the latest and greatest stuff as you kinda add more.
So there is definitely that potential, and as I say, there is an issue on Event Platform about having an upgrade path. I feel like there's probably just specific fields that you would need to make sure exist so that the relationships or certain features would work as expected.
Hmm.
But yeah, if there are camps like NetCamp that are in that position and are really interested in trying to upgrade to the latest version, then would definitely love to have the conversation around, what would it require to provide that upgrade path.
Or maybe it's even just like a submodule like upgrade status where you like turn it on and it tells you like, okay, you can upgrade to this version, like the latest version, but you have to like duplicate this field or rename or do like basically walks you through kind of what you have to do. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but yeah, if there's an issue on D.O, we can drop comments and ideas in there all day long.
And we can include a link to that in the show notes too.
So if somebody's listening to this episode and they run an event or are thinking about running an event or maybe knows somebody that runs events and they wanted to try out event
Or has
platform
been to an event.
or has been to
Mhm.
an event, what's the best way for them to test our event platform? And is there any particular feature they should maybe enable to see the power of event platform?
So we talked a little bit before about the event platform starter, and I think that's a great way to get started, particularly if you already have, let's say, DDEV installed locally. There's no reason you couldn't have a working copy of Event Platform, including the Event Horizon theme, up and running locally in under 15 minutes. So, it's definitely not a big lift from that standpoint. That being said, for anybody who is maybe a bit less on the technical side and just wants to sort of kick the tires, I did work with the team over at Drupal Forge to set up a template. And so you can go over to Drupal.org or Drupal Forge, scroll, it's currently at the bottom of the page to the event platform. And then within a few seconds, you can have a copy of it, event platform that you can start to try out. You can also enable like a dev interface. So you could also try, sub theming, or if you want to do, more ambitious things with it, you can play around that way. And then once you have a version of event platform that you think is ready to host, you can download that and then move it on to, DigitalOcean or whatever your preferred hosting solution is, and be able to get that hosted and public. Point your domain at it, and you're essentially good to go.
All right. So when we have folks on that are doing the great work of Drupal in their various ways, we always ask, how can people get involved? So if somebody listens to this and they're like, I love the idea of event platform, I wanna help Martin pick up one of these rocks and push it up a mountain, how can they go about doing that?
So we are doing monthly meetings on the third Wednesday of the month, and there are ongoing discussions in the event platform channel of Drupal Slack, which I think the next meeting is actually coming up tomorrow, so it'll be in the past by the time folks can listen to this. We're actually going to try doing asynchronously, which I see a few other initiatives doing. And then obviously in addition to that, folks can open up issues in the projects for either event platform, event horizon, or any of the other modules in the ecosystem as well.
Hmm.
Great.
All right, Martin, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure when you can stay with us for the whole show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You make it sound like we kick him out, like, "Hey, Martin, okay, you've done your job here. Just there's the door. Get the heck out." It's not the case. He can stay anytime. Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
And you can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo. And if you're using Event Platform, let us know.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron. All right, Martin, if our listeners want to get in touch with you or wanted to contribute to Event Platform, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
They can always find me on the Drupal and social platforms as Manclue, or they can read about some of the recent updates for Event Platform on my blog at manclue.com.
Awesome. James, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search James Stansbury. I'm also on Drupal Slack. There's a tugboat support channel in there in Drupal Slack. So feel free to hop in there and say hey. And check out Tugboat, tugboatqa.com.
Perfect. John, how about you?
You can find out about me personally at Picozy.com, on the social media platform of your choice, and Drupal.org at John Picozy. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking, dear listener. Have a good one.
Thanks. See you guys next week.